A very good evening and a warm welcome to Personal Finance. I'm Guguletu Cele. Relocation could be seen as a major upheaval, particularly when it comes to your finances. Jason Garner from Old Mutual Wealth joins me now from our Cape Town studios for a look at what you need to get in order before relocating. Jason, such a pleasure to speak to you this evening. Maybe let's start with the initial steps. So you decide to take that brave step and relocate to another country geographically. And the first initial steps that one needs to consider, I take it a consultation with a certified financial planner might be one of them.
For me, I think the first thing is, if you're going to make any kind of big decision like this, it's prudent to first of all just take a snapshot look at exactly where you are in your life from a personal perspective as well as from a financial perspective. Understanding that this is a massive move and is going to have fairly big impact in terms of your finances as well as your personal life. Understanding exactly where you are now and what that's going to do to those finances is key critical, absolutely. So having a chat with somebody who can help you unpack some of those things is probably a really good start.
Jason, maybe if you can walk us through some of those steps, and let's start with the basics. Your transactional day-to-day bank account. One wonders, does that need to be closed, or is there some kind of transfer that can be arranged with an international banking firm?
Well, I think the thing is that one needs to separate. If we're now intending to move permanently, obviously at that point in time, if you are and you're never going to come back to South Africa, the idea of keeping bank accounts open for a short period of time is a good idea, but for long duration is probably not going to be something that you're going to probably want to do, purely because it's a waste of cost and quite administratively intensive. If your intention is to go overseas or leave South Africa and then come back at a later point in time, you may want to open up or keep your bank accounts open, and you can do this. There's no problem with keeping bank accounts open. What you do need to do is you do need to inform your bank. What they will typically do is help you with a Rand blocked account, which will allow your debit orders and the things that you're keeping going in South Africa to carry on as they are, and then you can transfer funds from offshore into that bank account to ensure that you have sufficient funds to pay those things. So it is advisable to understand what sort of duration it is that you're going to be away. If it is permanent, the possibility is that you would keep it open for a period of time and then eventually shut those down. But I think one of the key things that you do need to do whilst even talking to your bank is to also understand what sort of implication that's going to happen or have on things like the debit orders you run. So perhaps you have a DSTV debit order, perhaps you have insurance, medical aids, things like that. You need to identify the things that you're going to be shutting off and the things that you need to keep open. Otherwise, you're going to end up wasting money or being insured for something that you don't need any longer.
Jason, on these debit orders that you allude to, is it important as well to read the fine print with regard to cancellation fees or penalties that you might incur upon closing some of these services?
Absolutely. So things like medical aids typically have sort of a 3-month clause. So make sure that you're looking at this well in advance. Don't leave these decisions in this administration, till the day before you decide to get on the plane. It's certainly something that you need to consider well in advance. You need to engage with those people. So, for instance, cell phone contracts, those are not things that there's typically quite a lot of penalties involved. So work that out, work out when the best time is to cancel it. You're obviously also going to need some communication forms as an example up until the time that you leave. So it's about working out the finer details here so that when you actually do pack up and do finally get on that plane, that you're not left with massive bills still to pay because those things run on for a few months afterwards, but certainly that you're also not shutting them off, sort of 2 months before you leave, and then you sort of left in the proverbial where you can't communicate and you can't do those things. Your insurance has been cancelled, and those things you still need. So I think it's absolutely critical that you have a look at when it is that you're going, that you take a sufficient time period before that, work out exactly what the costs are involved in terms of cancelling some of those things, and when it is the most appropriate time to let those people know that you are in fact cancelling those contracts.
But Jason, maybe if we can turn our attention now onto your asset base, and in particular the kind of assets that need financing. So I'm talking vehicles and maybe even property. And let's deal with the scenario where these particular assets haven't been paid off yet. What do you do in that kind of scenario? You still owe off your property, but yet you're looking to relocate. It must be a difficult one to examine with the banks.
Oh, look, I think the thing is that there's a couple of options open. So, I mean, property is probably the easier one of the two, because you can still obviously rent your property out if you chose not to sell it. So, if you're leaving and you want to maintain an asset base still in South Africa, keeping your property in South Africa is something you can do, and then rent it out and use that income to cover some of the costs of the property. Once again, I would suggest that you go and do a very, very good calculation in terms of whether that's the appropriate thing for you in terms of your finances and what you're going to need when you go overseas. But certainly it is an option. That being said, if you are selling it, you need to work out and be very careful, because again, there's a cost in selling. So I think a lot of people fall into the trap of saying, I'm going to sell my property, it's worth 3 million rand, and let's say I have a 1 million rand bond, so I should net 2 million rand, which then I can then use in my new life that I'm starting wherever that may be. The reality is that there's enormous costs involved with selling those properties. There's also a massive time delay. So unfortunately, I've seen too many people in the world where they've actually planned very, very well. Unfortunately, the time period that they planned for wasn't sufficient. So, expect your property to take between 3 and 6 months at the deeds office when you're selling it. Otherwise, you're going to have trouble, and you're going to end up either having debt and your home still to pay whilst you're overseas, whilst the transaction is still busy being given effect to.
Jason, before we get your closing comments and takeaway points with regard to this conversation, I want to deal with two particular areas. Your maybe investments portfolio and exposure to that. Do you need to close off the account and maybe transfer it, maybe if you can, to some other kind of stockbroking firm? And more importantly, the tax implications of relocating. You mentioned selling off assets. I'm sure capital gains will also play some kind of significant impact there.
I think the key thing is that when you're moving overseas, you are effectively liquidating your life in South Africa, and then moving it into, as I say, into cash, and then you're moving it essentially into a new country where you would, put the roots down and then restart your process of life. So it is really a situation where you're going to have to really examine what it is that you are planning to do in the future. The thing is as well is that you're not going to necessarily be investing in rands anymore. You're going to be investing in foreign currency. There's, as you know, a significant difference between the rand value and the dollar value. So, and what you get for dollars versus rands is different. So it's critical that you understand where you are from a financial perspective, what the impact of that is going to be once you've liquidated all your assets. You've covered all the costs, and including in that is tax, because you will pay a capital gains tax when you sell your assets, and you make a capital gain. There will be some tax implications. You're also going to have to go to the receiver of revenue and get what they call a tax clearance certificate, and that means that if there's any outstanding taxes up to that point, you are in fact going to have to settle that tax bill before they will actually allow you to transfer any funds offshore. So you really need to look at your affairs completely. You need to understand that the way that you're living now currently is based on a South African context, and you effectively are closing that down and opening it up in a different country and in a different context. So it is a massive decision. The implications around costs of moving are huge. I mean, just to give an example, to put your furniture into a container, a 20-foot container is going to cost you between 30 and 50,000 rand. So the moving costs are enormous. And what I would suggest to any person who is thinking about doing this is go and do the numbers, go and crunch them hard, understand where it is that you're going to, and what those costs are going to be, because settling into a new place in a new country is going to cost you money as well. So understanding the financial consequences of a shift like this is critical before you simply just pack up and decide to go. So that's the easy part. It's a lot of work, but the packing is actually the easy part. Understanding the consequences of your move is a little bit more complex than that.
Well, Jason, we have said quite a bit, but maybe if we can wrap it up in 5 key bullet points for the viewer who's watching tonight.
Okay, I think the first thing is understand the implications on your life. And by that, I'm talking about not your finances, I'm talking about your life. So, you've got an infrastructure here, you've got people around you. What are you going to? And how are you going to replace that? So that for me is the first key consideration, is understand the change in the dynamic of the life that you're going to lead from the one that you're living now currently. The second one is around your finances. Understand your financial position as it is now in rands. Understand what the costs are going to be for you to wrap up your affairs here in South Africa, and what are the costs of moving your affairs to another country. And then lastly, what are going to be the costs of settling yourself in and converting then that into whichever currency it is that you're going to. I think that's the key. So that sort of is the finances as it is now, and the finances that they will look like once you've made the shift. So those are 2 of the key considerations. The third one is understanding the time frame that we're dealing with. So, making a move like this is not going to take a couple of days. It's months and months and months and months. In fact, I would probably say years of preparation before you make a move like this. Simply because selling your house, making the move to another country doesn't just take a couple of weeks of work. And understanding the consequences of this, you need to have given it some thought beforehand. So those are key things. And then the timing around how you shut things off, making sure that you've got all your records, and that your policies, your life policies, your retirement annuities, your savings and your investments, that those are being wound up at an appropriate time, and that your life expenses, so the debit orders, your DSTV, your cell phone, your insurance, your medical aid, that those things are also taken care of up until the period of time that you are leaving. You don't want to be sitting without having those things in place still in South Africa, and you certainly don't also want to be sitting overseas a couple of months down the line and still be paying for those services which you aren't using. And those are typically the sort of the 4 points I would say people should think about. And then the last one is really around making sure that you're moving for a positive intent. Running from a problem is probably going to end up being a failed move, whereas if you're moving for a positive reason, that typically is a very, very good start.
Well, that's where we have to leave it for Personal Finance this evening. A big thank you to Jason Garner from Old Mutual Wealth. Do remember that we'd love to hear from you, so you can tweet any of your comments or suggestions to @CNBC Africa using the hashtag Finance410, or to myself @Kukumfupi. Until next time, it's goodbye for now.